Through the Desert by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Thank you for every activity under the video. It really helps. Chapter 6. For some days following they made no excursions. But to compensate for this, when the first star appeared on Christmas night, Mr. Rawlison's tent was illuminated with hundreds of lights burning on the little Christmas tree for Nell. The customary fir tree had been replaced by a salpoglossus plant cut out of a garden in Medinet, but nevertheless Nell found among its branches a quantity of dainties to eat and a beautiful doll which her father had bought for her in Cairo. Staś received from his father the much-longed-for English gun, besides cartridges, hunting paraphernalia, and a riding saddle. Nell was beside herself with joy, and Staś, although imagining that anyone owning a real gun should be correspondingly sedate, could not keep away from it, and choosing a moment when everything was quiet around the tent, he walked about on his hands. He was especially clever in performing this feat, which he had often practiced at school in Port Said, and he sometimes did it to entertain Nell, who envied him his skill. Christmas Day and the first part of the vacation the children spent inspecting their presents and training Saba. Their new friend proved to be exceedingly intelligent. On the very first day he learned to give his paw, bring handkerchiefs, which, however, he did not return willingly, and he was made to comprehend that it was not the thing for a gentleman's dog to lick Nell's face. Nell held her finger up and taught him various things, and by the affirmative wagging of his tail, he gave her to understand that he was listening with due attention and was profiting by these good lessons. During the walks in the sandy town square in Medinet, Saba became more famous every hour, but this, like all fame, had a reverse side, for he drew a great crowd of Arab children after him. At first they remained at a distance, but becoming bolder on account of the gentleness of the monster, they approached and at last swarmed around the tent, so that no one could move freely. And as every Arab child sucks a piece of sugar cane from morning till night, the children are always followed by swarms of flies, which are not only annoying, but dangerous, for they spread the germs of the Egyptian eye disease. Therefore the servants tried to drive away the children, but Nell not only interfered to protect them, but divided amongst the younger ones sweetmeats, which caused them to adore her, and at the same time naturally increased their numbers. 3 days later the general excursions began. Sometimes they traveled on the narrow-gauge railroads, of which the English had built many in Medinet el Fayum, sometimes partly on donkeys, and again on camels. It is true they found that the praise bestowed on these animals by Idris was much exaggerated, for not only beings, but people, found it difficult to stay on their backs. Yet after all there was a tiny grain of truth in what he said. The camels really did belong to the riding species, and as they were well fed with maize, they had fat humps, and showed such an inclination to gallop that they had to be held back. The Sudanese, Idris and Geber, notwithstanding the savage glare in their eyes, gained the confidence and approval of the party, especially on account of the zest with which they worked and the great attention they paid to Nell. Geber had always a cruel, brutal expression on his face, but Idris, who was not slow to notice every one of the party, adored this little person as the apple of his eye, declared over and over again that he would be more careful of her than of himself. Nevertheless, Mr. Rawlison imagined that Idris wanted to get at his pocket by means of Nell, but as he thought that nobody could help loving his dear little only daughter, he was grateful to him and did not spare the bakshish. In the course of 5 days, the party visited the ruins of Crocodilopolis, which lie near the town. It is there the Egyptians used to pray to their god, Sobek, who had a human body with a crocodile's head. The next excursion was made to the Hawara Pyramid and the ruins of the Labyrinth, and the longest excursion, made on camelback, was to Karun Lake. The northern bank of this lake, save for the ruins of some old Egyptian towns, is a wilderness in which not a vestige of life remains, but south of the lake stretches a beautiful, fertile region, the banks being overgrown with heather and canebrake, in which innumerable flocks of pelicans, flamingos, herons, wild geese, and ducks make their homes. There Staś found his first opportunity to show what a good aim he could take and what a good shot he was. Whether he used an ordinary gun or his Renamier rifle, His shots were so true that after each one the astonished Idris and the Arab rowers smacked their lips, and each time a bird fell into the water they cried out, Bismillah and Manali. The Arabs declared that there were a great many wolves and hyenas on the bank opposite the wilderness, and that if the carcass of a sheep were to be hidden there, they would be almost certain of getting a shot. In consequence of what they heard, Mr. Tarkowski and Stash spent 2 nights in the wilderness near the ruins of Dime. But the Bedouins stole the first sheep as soon as the huntsman had left, and the second only attracted a lame jackal, which Stash brought down. All further hunting had to be postponed, for it was now time for the 2 engineers to begin their journey to inspect the waterworks being erected at Bar Yusuf, in the vicinity of El Lahoun, to the southeast of Medinet. Mr. Rawlison was only waiting for the arrival of Mrs. Olivier. But unfortunately, instead of her arrival, they received a letter from the doctor telling them that she was again a victim of erysipelas due to the bite and would be unable to leave Port Said for some time. They were in a predicament. It was impossible for them to take the children, old Dinah, the tents, and all the servants with them, because the engineers would be here today and there tomorrow, and they might receive an order to go as far as the great Ibrahim Canal. Therefore, after some consideration, Mr. Rawlison decided to leave Nell behind in care of Dinah and Stash, and also of the agent of the Italian consul and the native mudir, or governor. Mr. Rawlison promised Nell, who was very unwilling to part with her father, that whenever feasible, he and Mr. Tarkowski would make trips to Medinet when in the vicinity, and that they would invite the children to come to them if there should be anything especially worth seeing. "We are taking Chamis along with us," he said, "and we will send him to you if necessary. Dinah must always accompany Nell, but as Nell does what she likes with her, you, Stash, must look after both of them." "You can rest assured," answered Stash, "that I shall protect Nell as if she were my own sister. She has Saba, I have the rifle, and now let anyone dare harm her." "That is not the point," said Mr. Rawlison. "You cannot possibly need Saba and the rifle. Only please see that she does not get too tired, and also that she does not take cold. I have asked the consul to send for a doctor from Cairo at once, should she become ill. We will send Chamis as often as possible to bring us news from you. The mudir will also visit you. Besides, I hope we shall not be away very long." Mr. Tarkowski also cautioned Stash well. He told him that Nell did not need his protection, for in Medinet, as also in the whole province of El Fayoum, there were no wild people nor wild animals, and that it would be ridiculous and unworthy of a boy in his 14th year to imagine such a thing. And so he had only to be careful and attentive, and not to undertake any kind of an expedition on his own account, especially on camels with Nell, for one ride on them tires anyone out. But when Nell heard this, she looked so sad that Mr. Tarkowski had to calm her. "Of course," he said, stroking her hair, "you shall ride on camels, but with us, or on the way to us, when we send Chamis to fetch you." "And can we not make any excursions by ourselves, not even tiny little ones?" asked the girl, and with her forefinger she demonstrated exactly the size of the little excursions. The fathers at last gave in, on condition that they would be led on donkeys and not on camels, and that they were not to go out to the ruins, where they might easily fall into a hole, but on the roads to the neighboring fields and the gardens on the outskirts of the town. The dragoman's and cook's servants were always to accompany the children. Then the 2 gentlemen left, but they did not go far away, only to Hawaret el Makta, so that 10 hours later they were able to return to Medinet for the night. This they did for several successive days until they had inspected the work in the vicinity. Then, as they were obliged to inspect work in places somewhat farther away, Chamis came riding up at night, and early in the morning took Stash and Nell along with him to the little town where their fathers wanted to show them something of interest. The children spent most of the day with their fathers, and towards sunset returned to their tents in Medinet. But some days Chamis did not come, and then Nell, notwithstanding she had the company of Stash and Saba, in whom she always discovered new talents, would watch lovingly for the messenger. In this manner the time passed until the feast of the 3 holy kings, on which day the 2 engineers returned to Medinet. 2 days later, they went away again, after having announced that they would now be gone a longer time, and would probably travel as far as Beni Suef, and from there to El Fasher, to the canal which stretches along the Nile far southward. Therefore, the children were greatly surprised when Shamus appeared at Medinet on the third day about 11 o'clock. Staś, who had gone to the pasture to watch the camels, saw him first. Shamus talked with Idris and told Staś that he was there only on his and Nell's account, and that he was coming to the tents to tell them where their two fathers had ordered them to go. The boy immediately ran with this great piece of news to Nell, whom he found playing with Saba before the tent. "Have you heard the news yet? Shamus is here!" he cried out from afar. Nell immediately began to hop, holding both feet together, as little girls do when skipping. "We are going away! We are going away! Yes, we are going away, and quite far away." "And where to?" asked she, brushing aside the hair from her forehead. "I don't know. Shamus said he would come here directly and tell us." "Then how do you know that we are going far away?" "Because I heard Idris say that he and Geber would depart at once with the camels. That means that we are going by train, and that the camels will be sent there in advance to where our fathers are, and from there we shall make various excursions." Nell had hopped about so long that her loose front hair covered not only her eyes, but her whole face, and her feet rebounded as quickly as though made of rubber. A quarter of an hour later, Shamus came and bowed before them. "Kawaje, young man," said he to Staś, "we leave in 3 hours by the next train." "For what place?" "To El Gharak el Sultani, and from there, together with the 2 gentlemen, on camels to Wadi Rayyan." Staś's heart beat with joy, but at the same time he was surprised at Shamus's words. He knew that Wadi Rayyan was a large, round, sandy ledge of rocks which rises in the Libyan desert to the south and southwest of Medinet, and that Mr. Tarkowski and Mr. Rawlison had said when they left that they were going in a diametrically opposite direction, toward the Nile. "What has happened?" asked Staś. "So my father and Mr. Rawlison are not in Beni Suef, but in El Gharak?" "That is so," answered Shamus, "but they have given orders to have their letters sent to El Fasher. In this letter the elder Effendi tells why they are in El Gharak." And he searched his clothes a while for the letter, and then called out, "O Nabi, Prophet, I have left the letter in the packet with the camel drivers. I will run and get it before Idris and Geber depart." He ran to the camel drivers, and meanwhile the children and Dinah began to prepare for the journey. As a longer excursion lay before them, Dinah packed up some underlinen and warmer clothes for Nell. Staś also thought of his things, and took special pains not to forget the rifle and the cartridges, as he hoped to come across wolves and hyenas on the sand dunes of Wadi Rayyan. Shamus did not return until an hour later, so bathed in perspiration and so out of breath that he could hardly speak a word. "I did not reach the camel drivers in time," he finally said. "I tried to overtake them, but without success. But that is of no consequence, for we shall find the letter and also the 2 Effendis in El Gharak. Is Dinah going with us?" "What? Perhaps it would be better for her to stay behind. Neither of the Effendis has said anything about her. Still they planned the journey, arranging for Dinah always to accompany the little girl, and therefore she will go with us on this trip." Shamus bowed, placed his hand on his heart, and said, "Sir, let us hurry, or else we shall miss the Qadr train." The baggage was ready, and they arrived at the station in time. It was not over 30 kilometers from Medinet to Gharak, but the train on the little branch line which connects these towns goes so slowly and stops so often that if Staś had been alone, he doubtless would have preferred traveling by camel to going by train, for he calculated that Idris and Geber, who had departed 2 hours earlier, would reach Gharak before him. But this would have been too long a journey for Nell, so her young protector, having been cautioned by both fathers, was very careful not to fatigue the girl. Besides, time passed so rapidly that they hardly knew that they had arrived at Gharak. The little station from which Englishmen usually made excursions to Wadi Rayyan was quite deserted. They saw only several veiled women with baskets of oranges, 2 strange Bedouins, camel drivers, and Idris and Geber with 7 camels, one of which was laden with luggage. On the other hand, there was not a trace of Mr. Tarkowski or Mr. Rawlison, but Idris explained their absence as follows. Both gentlemen have ridden toward the desert to set up the tent they brought from Esta, and have instructed us to follow them." "And how can we find them among the mountains?" said Stash. "They have sent guides to meet us." At these words he pointed to the Bedouins, the elder of whom bowed down before them, rubbed his finger in his one remaining eye, and said, "Our camels are not so fat as yours, but they are just as agile. We shall be there in an hour." Stash felt glad that they could spend the night in the desert, but Nell was somewhat disappointed. Until now she had certainly expected to meet her papa in Garak. In the meanwhile, the station master, a drowsy Egyptian wearing a red fez, approached, and as he had nothing else to do, he began to gaze at the European children. "These are the children of the Inglesi who rode toward the desert early this morning armed with guns," said Idris, as he lifted Nell into the saddle. Stash gave his gun to Chamis and seated himself beside Nell, for the saddle was large and fashioned like a palanquin, except that it had no roof. Dinah sat down behind Chamis. The others also mounted camels and followed them, and so they all departed. Had the station master looked after them, he might have been surprised, for the Englishmen of whom Idris had spoken were traveling directly toward the ruins in Sudan, whereas the children were going straight toward Taleh, in an opposite direction. But he had gone into his house, for there were no more trains to stop at Garak that day. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the weather was remarkably fine. The sun had passed to the western side of the Nile and was sinking below the desert. The golden and purple hues of the sunset illuminated that side of the heavens. The atmosphere was so permeated with the glow as to be nearly blinding in its brilliancy. The fields assumed a lilac hue, but the heights, taking on a pure amethyst color, were sharply outlined against the twilight background. The world lost all semblance to reality, and the light effects were as weird as those seen in some plays. As long as they rode over green and plowed land, the Bedouin leader led the march at a moderate pace. But the moment the camels felt the desert sand crunch under their feet, the whole scene suddenly changed. "Allah! Allah!" screamed the savage voices of the Bedouins. At the same time, the cracking of whips was heard, and the camels, changing from a trot to a gallop, began to race like a whirlwind, throwing clouds of the sand and loose gravel into the air with their feet. "Allah!" When a camel trots, he shakes his rider up more than when he gallops, a gait these animals seldom use, for then he sways more. And so this wild ride amused the children at first, but it is well known that too rapid swinging causes dizziness, and after a long time, as their pace did not slacken, little Nell's head began to swim and everything became indistinct before her eyes. "Stash, why are we racing so?" she cried as she turned toward her companion. "I think they have given the camels a loose rein, and now they cannot hold them back," Stash replied. But when he saw that the girl's face was somewhat pale, he called to the Bedouins, who were racing along ahead of them, to go more slowly. But his cries only resulted in their screaming, "Allah!" again, and the animals increasing their speed. At first the boy thought that the Bedouins had not heard him, but when there was no answer to his repeated demands, and when Geber, who was riding behind them, continued to whip up the camel on which he and Nell sat, he came to the conclusion that instead of the camels having broken loose, it was the men who were hurrying them along for some reason of their own. It occurred to him that perhaps they had gotten on the wrong road, and were obliged to run like this to make up for lost time, fearing that the two gentlemen might scold them if they arrived late. But he soon saw that this could not be the reason, for Mr. Rawlison was more likely to be angry with him for tiring out Nell. So what could this mean, and why did they not obey his orders? In his heart the boy began to be very angry and also very much worried over Nell. "Stop!" he cried with all his might, turning to Geber. "On scout!" roared the Sudanese in answer, and they raced on. In Egypt night comes on toward 6 o'clock. The sunset soon died away, and a full round moon, colored red from the reflection of the sunset, arose and flooded the desert with its mild light. In the silence nothing was to be heard save the camels gasping for breath, the quick, hollow clatter of their hoofs on the sand, and now and then the cracking of the Bedouins' whips. Nell was so tired that Stash was obliged to hold her in the saddle. Every minute she asked if they would not soon arrive at their destination, and only the hope of seeing her father soon again buoyed her up. But they both looked around in vain. An hour passed, then another. There was neither tent nor campfire to be seen. Then Staś's hair stood on end with terror. He realized that they had been kidnapped.
Remember to subscribe.